All right. Well, thank you to Dr. Yang, the panel, and the ACC Programming Committee for giving me the chance to share with you my thoughts on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I'd like to motivate this talk with not a case, but a story. A story of one of my good friends, Adi Suresh on the left, pictured with his father Arun on the right. This photo was taken about 10 years ago, not too far from here, actually. Adi was a student graduating from Georgia Tech about a decade ago, and he was celebrating the happy moment with his father. But little did he know, 4 years later after this picture would be taken, that Arun would die of a massive MI on his own and on a business trip at the age of 55. This is a story not uncommon, and unfortunately one that many of you probably have heard from patients or loved ones in your own families. Arun emigrated from India in 1986, and he came to America and had no experience with Western foods, and Adi was looking through some of his dad's personal effects after the death, and found many photos of him enjoying Western food, pizza, pasta, and on one of them, Arun was having a piece of pizza, and he wrote on the back, "This is pizza. I really like this. This tastes good." And unfortunately, Arun was diagnosed with diabetes not only just 3 years after he came to America. And, he tried to take the medications, do all the right things. And even 2 years before his death, he actually lost a tremendous amount of weight and was really on a good track. But unfortunately, this is not enough sometimes. And that's why Dr. Yang and myself and several others, as part of this effort, met with Representative Jayapal, and as part of our grassroots advocacy efforts, worked with her office. And unsurprisingly, there was a staff member in her office who had encountered a similar tragic story of an unexpected death of a South Asian family member. And we worked with her office to do and address some of the same issues that we've talked about today, that Dr. Yang had mentioned and several other speakers have mentioned, of just the dearth of knowledge and data. And so Pramila was able to cobble together this bill, which actually she did get passed a few years ago, which is a huge achievement in a divided Congress. Unfortunately, didn't make it through to the Senate. But I'm going to circle back to this idea. And as I go to my next slide, which is going to have some key learning points, very straightforward learning points I hope that all of us can take away from this talk as we see our next patient. So number one, I really want to emphasize the importance of looking at these South Asian patients holistically. Number two, being aggressive with primary prevention for these patients. And this is from the lens of an interventional cardiologist who enjoys doing procedures, and I'll speak more to that in a minute. And finally, keep an open mind, especially as we are looking at new data. So speaking of new data, this is an article published by Dr. Krishnaraj in February of this year, and may have already been mentioned today, but I think it bears repeating. And that this is a very interesting cohort study from Toronto, actually, where they looked at 60 patients from a primary care clinic of European ancestry, 60 patients of South Asian ancestry. And they looked at the number of stem cells that these patients had and their ability to respond to vascular damage. A lot of these patients, all of them had either and or diabetes and pre-existing cardiovascular disease. And it turns out that the number of regenerative stem cells that South Asians had categorically were far fewer, and their ability to repair vascular damage was far less than their European counterparts of similar age and gender. So this at least helps us understand that there seems to be a very big prevalence of patients that just seem to have worse disease. Despite having two identical patients with the same risk factors, one just seems to get coronary disease at younger ages. So this goes to my first point of talking about these patients holistically. So many South Asians are vegetarian, especially Indians, and this is a very typical Indian dish. Some of you may have had it. It's chole bhatura. It's very tasty. And a lot of Indians would actually say this is a healthy meal, and it looks really healthy. Chickpeas have a lot of fiber. They have a lot of protein. But if you look at this plate, the number of net carbs on this plate is about 80 to 85 grams, just in this meal alone. And that's not even including the appetizers or the desserts. And when you get to this slide, then it can be easily up to 150, 160 grams of net carbs. You'd be better off going to McDonald's, especially if you're a diabetic or you're pre-diabetic, which is oft a very, a hidden epidemic, I think, in the South Asian community. So this takes me to my second point, which is about setting aggressive primary prevention targets. So as an interventional cardiologist, I'd be very happy if all the preventative cardiologists in the world were able to stamp out disease so we didn't have to have stents. I mean, I would love to be out of a job in that sense because, honestly, I don't want to see another one of these patients come in with a STEMI needing, more and more stents or needing heart transplants for ischemic reasons. And now we may actually have the tools in our armamentarium, especially with the advent of SGLT2 inhibitors for our diabetics and for our patients with heart failure. We have PCSK9 and now small interfering RNA molecules that really give us more options to treat some of these thorny conditions. And personally, this is a set of targets that's actually courtesy of Dr. Agarwala. It's in the Cardiology magazine published a couple months ago, so very easily available. And I approach all of these patients in a very similar way. I educate them on their elevated risk. As we've shown today, it's very difficult to put numbers on them because we haven't been able to quantify them yet because we don't have the data. And I just ask them if they would like to be treated as aggressively as possible, and I offer them the opportunity to be on PCSK9, to take some of these more aggressive medications, with the understanding that they may have more side effects or they may be exposing themselves to more cost. But I let them make that decision, and I make sure that they know that there is, this high prevalence of disease. Now, this takes me to my third point, which is about keeping an open mind, especially when it comes to data. Now, this is a slide that I never thought I'd be putting together or even mentioning, 5-6 years ago, especially because it's something that we've all talked and studied, and there were many presentations here at ACC and the previous years about genetic testing for clopidogrel, which is a prodrug that needs to be activated into its active metabolite. Now, this study came from the UK Biobank, published in JACC in 2023. And what they did was they looked at a large population, over 40,000 Bangladeshis and Pakistani patients in the UK, and they checked for the CYP2C19 activation enzyme. And it turns out that there were a large population of patients who were unable to adequately metabolize the prodrug of clopidogrel, meaning that they would be considered non-responders. And then they looked at those patients and historically, and they realized that these patients who were on Plavix ended up having more MIs, and that's that bar graph at the bottom. So the poor metabolizers in the blue ended up having 10% chance of having recurrent MI versus the normal metabolizers in the orange there. So very, very provocative data, and definitely makes me question whether or not I should put these patients on Plavix, especially when we have other medications, ticagrelor and prasugrel, that don't need to be activated. So going back full circle, this is Pramila Jayapal, same picture but different bill. She's reintroduced this legislation. She has not given up on getting this passed. She wants more NIH funding seen she wants more funding for the NIH to be able to study this important topic, and that should be a calling card for all of us to make sure we don't give up on our patients either. And finally, this is Adi. A couple of years after his father's death, he took this news and he revamped his life, and so he's much healthier. He was also diagnosed with prediabetes and turned that around, and now he has a healthier diet and is exercising regularly. So I encourage you to keep up the good fight and continue to educate and get the word out about South Asians and heart disease. Please connect with me. I look forward to keeping the conversation and the dialogue going. Thank you.